Hello there, and welcome to episode 6 of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. Don't leave Ludlov and Tolfmann all alone in the autumn wildwoods. Join them on their adventures during the next chapters. Tolfmann's Secret, Dreadful Dawn, and Salt and Smoke. Grab a blanket, a mug of tea and a snack, make yourself comfortable and listen to the standard edition of our newest witch hunter tale after this announcement. Instead of talking about our extended edition, we wanted to do something different this time. Since it's November, which is the month of the indie authors, and we know how it can be a real struggle to find an audience as an indie author without the stamp of approval of some big-arse publishing company, we decided to give some indie authors a platform to introduce their books. First, I'd like to mention Mike Soldano, who we've talked about before. We accidentally stumbled upon his Instagram page and turned out to have a lot in common, like our age and the year we got married. He writes classic fantasy novels like Sword of a Fallen Hero and In the Eye of the Midnight King. Erin also brought me an indie fantasy book by an author called Damian Black, and I was really impressed with his writing style. Nowadays in modern fantasy, authors tend to use modern words like okay and basically write modern behaving characters in a fantasy setting, and I really thought Damian's approach was refreshing in that regard. His series is a 5-part series called The Broken Stone Chronicles, and I own part 1, Devil's Night Dawning. He's currently working on the 5th and last part of the series. We also scouted Reddit for some enthusiastic indie fantasy authors that we are not yet familiar with, but we just wanted to lift them out of this harsh competitive environment for writers at the moment, especially with all the AI content out there. We tried to make a selection based on what you might be interested in. So here goes. Striker's Search by Michael Lance. This is book 1 in the Striker series. Evan Striker is a knight turned witch hunter, yes, witch hunter, and a wanted man in pursuit of the infamous and presumed dead sorceress Kalesso to retrieve his stolen family. This 2-book series has been completed. We had to include this book in our selection since it's about a witch hunter. Soon Enough, a Thin Places novel by Magnus Watt. This is a Scottish urban fantasy about a struggling comedian entertaining tourists with ghost tours when a mysterious apparition turns his life upside down and sends him on a quest in a world where folklore bleeds into reality. The Mer King, Book 1 by Cecily Ann Winters. A reverse Little Mermaid story meets Avatar, but dark. Book 2 coming out in March 2026. Brandbound, Volume 1, Hallowed Be the Menu by Adam K. Armbrust. A lit RPG with a slow burn enemies to lovers romance. Book 2 is planned for release in 26. From Legend, The Reeve Book 1 by Ian Lewis. This first book in a Gothic Western series, part mystery, part manhunt, revolves around Logan Hale, the highest peace officer in Beldenridge, a city he knows better than anyone, with its labyrinthine streets, vaulted architecture and tales of mutations and vicious enemies. But a sinister suicide investigation leads him to question if they are just tales after all. We selected this novel because it reminded us of Witch Hunter. Rise of the Rat by Jason Barnes, with artwork and design by Taz. This is a D&D-inspired dark epic fantasy novel. A lone exile is offered a bargain by a strange fae. Trapped in a lawless city, he must conquer threats inside and out to survive, to rise above the fates, or to remain caught in that trap like a rat forever. This will eventually be a 5-book series, of which 3 books have been written. The Seven Sisters by Afonso Loureiro, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Strange things happen when your dreams come true. The Seven Sisters are capable of capturing memories and dreams, some even nightmares, to use them later. And finally, War of the Umano Magi by Raymond Hairston. A fantasy tale of war and survival set in a world reborn from the ashes of destruction, on the brink of war, where magic and technology exist in a fragile balance. The group of downtrodden people at the heart of the conflict, the Umano-Magi, are known for their unpredictable magical abilities and are caught between human alliances and powerful magical forces. We won't bother you anymore with all the places you can find our stories or whine about liking and subscribing. We just wanted you to meet a number of indie authors, since their work is often hidden behind AI-generated junk or traditionally published works. But now, as Miles Quaritch would put it, I will shut my pie hole and allow you to immerse into our next episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. Tolfmann's Secret. After some further exploration of the hamlet, Ludlov and Tolfmann settled for what must have been a rare two-storied house. The roof was as good as gone, but most of the upper-level floorboards were still in place. The worn wooden door had some gaping holes in it and offered little resistance as they entered. Inside, it smelled of wood that had spent many years absorbing the scent of smoke, mold, and damp earth. The dirty, broken window looked like it hadn't allowed a ray of sunlight to pass through it for a decade. They stared at the remains of a cobblestone hearth and a worn table. With a sigh, Tolfmann threw his backpack and damaged lantern on top of it. The boarded floor was slick and covered in moss. They decided to try and warm themselves at the hearth with some firewood from outside, which had been kept mostly dry by a shingled awning on the outer wall. Ludlov put his lantern and backpack next to Tolfmann's and took out his rapier. Then he stuck it in the shaft of the chimney, wiggling the blade until a mysterious mass of rotten leaves, small branches, and moist earth came loose.
"I think it's cleared,"
he told his initiate. "I'll get it to burn," Tolfmann said, as he came in with a stack of logs and knelt by the fireplace.
"Yes,"
Ludlov said softly.
"You always do."
Tolfmann turned his head in his master's direction, looking a bit startled. "What do you mean, Master Ludlov?"
"I mean, you always take care of the fire. Here, on the road, even in Garner's house."
Tolfmann swallowed and stared into Ludlov's eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said eventually, his voice almost breaking. "What I did with the wolves?" Ludlov smiled at him.
"I heard you too. Via. It's such a beautiful language, Arcanic. The word truly evokes the image of a flame flaring up in one's mind, doesn't it?"
Tolfmann bowed his head in shame. I'm sorry, Master."
"For what, Tolfmann?"
Ludlov asked, genuinely curious.
I shouldn't have defended yourself? Spoken the language of the goddess?
Kept it a secret, Tolfmann finished. Ludlov sighed and stood watching his young companion, who soon averted his gaze. Eventually, the witch hunter laid a hand on Tolfmann's shoulder.
"I understand why you did. I might have done the same in your shoes. Now, let's get this fire going."
He smiled warmly at the young man. Unexpectedly, tears welled up in Tolfmann's eyes. "I didn't know I could... I mean, I know your wife could also... And you don't think of the sacred stones in the same way most do. But you're still a witch hunter. I couldn't know if...
I'm getting cold here, Tolfmann."
The initiate smiled and sighed in relief, then wiped away a tear. Then he cleared his throat, took a deep breath, and laid the firewood in the hearth. Holding on to the top log, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Via." A glow spread from his fingers into the wood, where it turned from golden to red until the log began to smoke. Tolfmann lifted his hand leaving a flame in its wake. The firewood was burning.
"It's beautiful,"
Ludlov said. There weren't any chairs left in the house, so Ludlov just sat down on the floor next to Tolfmann. He used the opportunity to try to fix the initiate's lantern, carefully picking it up from the table, replacing the oil and fiddling about with the wick. Once it seemed in order, he put it back. There was a comfortable silence. Far away from the howling of the wolves, Ludlov's muscles at last started to relax as the warm glow and soothing crackle of the fire filled the decrepit room. He took the opportunity to take a small piece of parchment from his backpack and brief Lady Hoskiv.
"Since you decided to share your secret with me, Tolfmann, I'll do likewise."
The initiate, who had been staring into the flames, seemed to be shaken out of some reverie and gave Ludlov a confused look. The witch hunter smiled back. He was about to whisper the familiar name to his ring when he realized with a painful jolt that it wasn't there. He stiffened in shock, but then he realized he had taken the ring off when he had been rummaging through the intestines. A quick grab in his breast pocket revealed the handkerchief in which he had wrapped it. He sighed with relief when he felt it was still there. Without hesitating any longer, he took the ring out of the cloth, slid it over his finger, raised his hand towards his lips and whispered,
"Fulgrin."
Tolfmann watched him in tense silence, his expression unreadable. They waited for a long minute, but then Ludlov heard the familiar cry that announced the arrival of his friend. In a sudden flutter, the falcon dashed from the broken window, flapping its wings and diving right past Tolfmann. It circled the room once, then glided down elegantly and nestled on Ludlov's forearm, looking at the witch hunter with stern, proud eyes, glistening like topaz and onyx in the firelight. Ludlov gently stroked the bird's chest with the back of his index finger. Then he took a sheet of vellum from his backpack, along with a small ink jar and a quill made from a crow's feather.
"Is that falcon magical?"
Tolfmann asked carefully.
"Well, the ring that brought him here certainly is,"
Ludlov said, as he tapped the band on his finger. Then he straightened the vellum on the floorboard.
"Where did it come from?"
the young man asked curiously.
"I'm not sure,"
Ludlov said, looking up towards the broken window.
"When I summon Fulgrin, he just knows where to go, and it never takes too long for him to arrive." No, I mean, where did you get that ring?" "Oh."
Ludlov remained quiet for a bit while he opened the ink jar and gently dipped his quill into it.
"I got it from a friend who, well, he couldn't take care of Fulgrin."
Tolfmann kept looking at Ludlov inquisitively, waiting for him to finish his explanation.
"Because birds make him ill,"
he clarified.
"They make him sneeze."
"You're not joking, are you, Master?"
"Why would I be?"
The initiate stared at the falcon in childlike wonder.
"Can I touch him?" "I think so. It's up to him, of course, but since I trust you, I think he will as well."
Tolfmann stretched out his arm towards the bird and carefully caressed Fulgrin's head with the tip of his finger. The animal bashfully turned its gleaming eyes away from him. Ludlov smiled and turned his attention back to the vellum, trying to decide what he was going to write. Then the words came out one by one. Fulgrin curiously looked on from atop the witch hunter's shoulder, following the movement of his fingers with every word.
"Suspect close. No sign of Svensson or Brynjar. Scharf dead. Found human organs and remains. Probable cult or coven activity. Some abducted men returned as undead."
He hesitated for a while, then added,
"Tolfmann and I are in good health."
Ludlov quickly scanned the short note he had scribbled, then reread it more thoroughly. Finally, annoyed by his own perfectionism, he tore it from the sheet of vellum and returned the rest of it to his backpack. Then he produced a tiny leather tube and some strings. He carefully tucked the note inside the tube and gently attached it to Fulcrin's neck with one of the little strings. Recently, he had found out that this was more comfortable for the bird than having to carry the message fastened to its tarsus. As a rule, Ludlov tried to avoid using Fulcrin to carry messages to his superiors. Although he looked like a normal falcon, Lady Hoskev might still discover his magical nature someday. That was, if Fulcrin was in fact a magical falcon. Ludlov didn't quite know the answer to that question himself. The ring that summoned his feathery friend had once belonged to Queen Sintrasha of Oskurta, and was certainly imbued with arcanic properties. But Fulcrin as such seemed to be a perfectly natural bird, albeit an exceptionally obedient and highly intelligent one. But that wasn't unheard of. After all, he'd heard Mistress Weiss's crow, Corey, was quite smart as well. After his ordination as a witch hunter, Ludlov had restrained himself from summoning Fulcrin for some time, until great need had driven him to employ the animal as his messenger. When Lady Hoskev had asked him why he'd been so secretive about the bird, he had shrugged it off with a joke about pets not being allowed in the witch hunter order. She hadn't asked about it since. By now, everyone in the headquarters knew that Ludlov and Fulcrin were every bit as inseparable as Brynjar and Shaf had been. The Witch Hunter Order has no idea of this bird's true origins, do they? Tolfmann asked. Do you think they would disapprove? I'm not sure, Ludlov admitted. I know the Codex allows for the use of existing magical artifacts if necessary to defeat evil, but this is a permanent partnership. They might not be so keen on that. He shrugged. I think it's best not to bring it up, and treat him like a normal animal companion. Tolfmann nodded in agreement. I suppose everyone keeps secrets, he mumbled absent-mindedly. This is an exciting one, I must admit, but I will keep it to myself, obviously. Playfully, Ludlov stroked the underside of Fulcrin's curved beak with his index finger, smiling. Proud yellow eyes stared at him. Then the bird squeaked. Yes, my friend. I'll be fine, don't worry, Ludlov said. Then he raised his arm to send off his winged messenger. With a cry, the falcon fled through the broken window. He'll be heading for Seven Peaks now, Ludlov said, still looking through the window, where now nothing more was visible than the black night sky. He turned to Tolfmann. Why don't you take out your bedroll and have some rest, while I stand guard, he suggested. All right, but I get the second watch of the night, Tolfmann replied. I know how important it is to you to be able to pull your weight. Tolfmann remained quiet as he unrolled the deerskin from his backpack. So, Master, I want to ask you something, the Initiate said eventually. Name it, Tolfmann, Ludlov said, still sitting on the floor, looking into the fire. What you've seen me do, it's... not many people. I mean... I see no reason to discuss it with your superiors. When we were talking on the cliff, you already knew my wife had similar abilities, Ludlov recalled. How did you figure that out? Tolfmann smiled. I picked it up, from little hints. You talk about her a lot. I do I? Ludlov reacted, a bit embarrassed. You must have loved her very much. Ludlov swallowed and nodded, then hastily reached for a way to steer the conversation in another direction. Have you had this gift your entire life? He asked prudently. I believe so, Tolfmann answered. After a long silence, interrupted only by the crackling fire in the hearth, he seemed to have made up his mind to confide in Ludlov. My grandmother mastered the arcanic arts.
She was known as Lady Bess in the community. She knew everything about treating ailments and tending to wounds, but I don't think many people knew there was more to it than just herb lore. I'd never thought of such abilities as the sort of thing that was passed on from generation to generation, but apparently I had it too. You're right, though. It isn't hereditary in the common sense of the word, Ludlov remarked. It seems to run in some families, but it can stay away for generations as well. And sometimes it occurs only once. No one understands exactly. I know that, Master, Tolfmann said. But surely you don't believe it was mere happenstance that my grandmother and I both developed an ability to perform arcanic? My dear boy, Ludlov said. Surely you know that you do not perform arcanic. You learn to speak it, and the goddess blessed your words so that they effect supernatural changes in the world. My wife understood this. She always said she didn't really do anything. It was all the goddess who chose to work through her words. This is not what we're told in the Order, Tolfmann said, a bit taken aback. No, Ludlov said, feeling somewhat guilty for the condescending tone he had used. Tolfmann couldn't be held accountable for the way he had been educated. Voronitzianism teaches that you draw power from the sacred stones when you use the art. However, when you read the early writings of saints like Wolfen and even Wilhelm, clearly that is not the nature of arcanic. It is the language of the goddess, and she blesses whom she will with it. Tolfmann looked at him with wide eyes. So, the goddess, for whatever reason, chose me and my grandmother? Clearly she did. And why? Well, no one on Hruda can truly understand the hows and whys of the blessings of the goddess, Initiate. Tolfmann nodded slowly. I know you've written books about this, Master, but I've never read them. Ludlov smiled and shrugged. No one else has either. Tolfmann returned the smile awkwardly and fell silent. It was quite impressive how you made fire without any effort, Ludlov said unexpectedly. Most who master arcanic have to dig deep inside themselves and concentrate long and hard to find the place where the words are connected to reality. They turn to prayer, fasting, or meditation, sometimes for weeks before anything happens. But for you, it seems to take no effort at all. And the mastery you displayed. Few manage to do more than slowly heating up a mug of tea. But I just saw you set a log of wood ablaze in a few heartbeats. That was remarkable. Tolfmann shrugged the praise away, avoiding eye contact. It was my grandmother who taught me all of it, really. Most of the things she could do, I eventually learned as well. Alas, communicating with animals or calming them down isn't one of them, he said, carelessly gesturing outside, or I could have dealt with those wolves in a better way. Ludlov smiled. Then again, Tolfmann continued, my grandmother used her ability to heat up food, but she could never make a fire like I could. There were differences. Can you do other things as well? Ludlov asked prudently. Not all that much, I'm afraid, Tolfmann said. Sadly, I was still learning from my grandmother while she was dying. I could soothe her and ease her pain a bit, but I couldn't heal her. That was hard to face. She was all I had in the world. The Initiate looked down, as if he was trying to come to a decision. Ludlov remained quiet. Eventually, he dared to ask, It sounds like you were raised by your grandmother. Did you lose your parents as a young boy? Tolfmann gave him a shaky, hesitant nod in reply, as if he couldn't answer the question with a simple yes or no. Ludlov sensed the Initiate wanted to tell him more, and he had long ago learned it was best in such situations to simply wait. As you know, I was raised in Ostfluss. I think I was still a little boy when it happened, so I have no clear idea what caused it. But my family came under the influence of evil. My grandmother was the only one who was able to resist it. She indeed did practically raise me on her own, as my father, her son, neglected me, as did my mother for that matter. Ludlov had picked up on the anger in the young man's voice and recognized it. I believe my parents poisoned or hurt her, and thus caused her death. Gran had always protected me and, well, she was in the way. In your parents' way? Ludlov asked. Yes, Master Ludlov. My parents needed me for something. Some ritual, I think. I've no idea what it was supposed to do. But my parents were always trying to separate grandmother and me. They were trying to involve me in their practices, but I knew in my heart they had some evil design in mind. And so I always remained close to Gran. Shortly before she got ill, she gave me a relic to protect me. Tolfmann rummaged in one of his pockets and pulled out what looked like a small, beautifully crafted wooden box, like one that might hold jewelry. Ludlov was impressed. If he recognized it correctly, the little box was a miniature replica of the chest of Sancta Adalia. He had never had the honor of visiting the real one in Lioncrest, but he knew what it looked like. He had come across several depictions of it in the library books he had studied on the topic of relics. Can I hold it? He asked. Tolfmann offered the box to Ludlov to study it. The craftsmanship was exquisite. This has to be a container for a first-degree relic, Ludlov concluded in awe. It holds a strand of her hair, Tolfmann said. Ludlov allowed his fingers to caress the delicate shape of the chest. Sancta Adalia was a popular saint, in part because her life's story was so remarkable and adventurous. Her journey into sainthood had begun when she was still a small child. When her home was threatened by demon worshippers, she had hidden in a big chest and started praying incessantly for the intervention of the goddess. Her entire home had been searched, raided, and burned. Both of her parents and all 9 of her siblings had died in the fire. She had heard their cries of fear and their screams of pain, but had kept on praying for the salvation of their souls. When there had been nothing left but silence, ruins, and burned corpses, outsiders had found her in the chest, in good health and untouched by the flames. She retreated to a small convent in Lioncrest after those horrible events, taking the chest with her. People from all the nations of the goddess now came to visit her, to touch the chest and pray for protection in times of despair and helplessness. Ludlov offered Tolfmann a careful look of petition and received a permissive nod in return. He carefully opened the box, gave the young man another wide-eyed look, and when he saw that Tolfmann trusted him, he gently touched a strand of honey-colored hair, glowing warmly in the firelight. It gave him a strange sensation. He had investigated and touched numerous relics in his life, but this one was particularly remarkable. He closed the box again and returned it to Tolfmann. This is a very powerful relic, Tolfmann, he concluded. Pleased by Ludlov's interest, Tolfmann continued his story. I carried it with me when I escaped my hometown after Gran's death. My family came looking for me, and I kept asking Sancta Adalia to protect me. I remember it so vividly. He shook his head, still astonished at his own tale. I was asleep, hiding in a cave, when my father's minions arrived on the scene, carrying torches and weapons. They came inside. I had nowhere to run. And yet, they never found me. They left the cave, and I was able to shake them off. I made my way through the wilderness, not even knowing where I was headed. I've no recollection of how I survived for so long with the meager supplies I had taken along. But eventually, I was found by some traveling monks. They were of an order following Wilhelm the White. When I explained to them what had happened, they took me in and gave me my formal education. I really believe that, along with the intercession of the angels, this relic saved my life, Tolfmann concluded, playfully tapping the lid of the tiny chest. It was as if, every time I asked for her intercession, I remained undetected by possible threats during my travels. Ludlov was still gazing at it. He had experienced the power of relics and blessed items himself, so he had no reason to doubt the young man's tale. The Witch Hunter Order had zealously collected medallions and relics like this one for centuries. They were especially helpful in rare occasions of exorcism. Had Lord Adomir or Lady Hoskiv known that this young man possessed such a precious item, they would surely have persuaded him to donate it to the Order. Ludlov would never mention it to them, though. The box was clearly of great personal value to Tolfmann. It might be his last keepsake from his grandmother. The initiate stood up and put the box on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Then he smiled at Ludlov and said, "Just for this night. May it protect us both." An hour later, Ludlov was still on the first watch of the night. He was sitting with his back against the wall, looking out of the broken window, even though there was only blackness outside. Tolfmann had become a dark, perfectly still shape in front of the dying fire, where only a single stubborn flame remained dancing amidst a rugged landscape of red glowing coal. Fragmented memories of conversations and half-developed theories rushed through the witch hunter's consciousness like autumn leaves caught in a strong wind. Ludlov felt guilty for sitting here, waiting. As long as there was no proof of Brynjar or Svensson's death, it felt wrong to stall. Still, he was only human, and he couldn't go on for weeks without respite. He supposed his guilt mostly stemmed from his lack of results so far. He didn't have any answers, and he didn't have a plan. Rest felt like a reward he hadn't earned. A wave of desperation came over him. This adventure was growing less likely to get a pleasant outcome with every passing moment. In his mind, he could already see the noticeable amount of empty chairs in the mess hall of the Witch Hunter headquarters. He obviously didn't want to be among those lost, but he especially dreaded facing those empty seats upon his return to Seven Peaks. Whenever anyone in the Order failed to return from an assignment or quest, Ludlov always had trouble eating for days, unable to keep his eyes off those vacant chairs. They had become a symbol of failure and loss to him. He remembered he had even been lost in grief for 3 days when Gerhard had perished on a quest. He had been an unpleasant fellow who always took credit for his brethren's achievements, while he had only ever had eyes for pretty women. In fact, Ludlov had heard rumors that this was exactly what had caught him off guard and led to his demise. But still, he had been a brother in the Order, and Ludlov had felt deep sorrow at the loss of yet another witch hunter. After all, the maiden's love was universal, endless, and unconditional. Who was he to argue with her? Ludlov knew he needed to clear his mind. Directing his gaze to the heavy wooden beam in the ceiling above him, he prayed to the goddess.
Divine Mother,
he whispered in the quiet night.
I thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon me. Thank you for keeping me alive, for bringing me here safely, and above all for protecting Tolfmann. I beg you, Mother, keep protecting him. The truth is that I couldn't bear the loss of another young and promising soul. I know that all are safe in your final embrace, and I will accept your will, whatever it may be. But if it be within your providence, please, spare him.
He fell quiet and closed his eyes.
Blessed Mother,
He continued,
guide us. Help us to find Brynjar and Svensson, and bring an end to the evil that plagues Hübschdorf. I am your instrument, Mother. Use me as you see fit.
Peace came over him. It was the sort of peace he only ever experienced in prayer. As his heartbeat quieted down, Ludlov became aware of Tolfmann's soft and regular breathing. Despite all the danger that surrounded them, the young man's sleep seemed untroubled. Ludlov stared at him for a while. The veil of sleep had given the determined initiate a boyish, innocent, even fragile quality. It made Ludlov wonder what it would be like to have a son. Then he shifted his gaze to that last remaining flame in the hearth. He was thirsty, and he felt his eyelids growing heavier. It would be a good idea to move around a bit, stretch his legs and recharge his energy. Perhaps he could take another look at that well outside. As he stood up, he noticed the relic box on the mantelpiece and picked it up. The lid contained an engraving depicting Sancta Idalia's innocent face. Even though she had been in her 40s when she had died, she was usually portrayed as a teen. Ludlov turned the box around, carefully appreciating its artwork in the weak, warm firelight. Engraved in the back of the box was a depiction of the original chest which Sancta Idalia had used as a hiding place. There was a human heart in the middle, surrounded by rays of light. Ludlov's admiration was suddenly interrupted by a scraping sound outside, like boots dragging through gravel. Startled, he quickly put the box in his coat pocket so as not to lose it.
Sancta Idalia, aid me.
Quietly, the witch hunter refilled the oil in his lantern, lit it, and loaded his pistol. He didn't really expect to come across any wolves or worse in this ruined village, but he needed to be prepared nevertheless. He did his best to move in utter silence, granting the initiate his well-deserved rest. Holding his lantern in one hand, Ludlov opened the front door with his other, and then gently closed it behind him, insofar as he was able to shut the damaged thing. Ludlov breathed out slowly to regain his focus and peered into the night. The wind was stronger than he'd expected, and the nightly chill penetrated through his thick coat. The village square was as still as a painting. He heard an owl nearby, but he couldn't see it. Perhaps the bird had attempted to catch a mouse on the ground. Gingerly, he stepped out into the open space. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw some movement near the well house. It might just have been a rabbit or a fox, but he decided to take a peek nonetheless, all the while keeping an eye on the building that held his sleeping initiate. As he slowly approached the well house, it seemed ominous somehow, as if the brick building was some great lurking monster, the barred gate, its fang-filled mouth, eager to swallow him. It didn't deter him. It would be safer inside than on the square where unfriendly eyes might pick up the light of his lantern. The gate opened with a sad metallic whine reminiscent of a begging dog. Inside, the simple octagonal construction smelled of wet gravel and stagnant water. Once more, Ludlov tried to look down into the dark, avoiding the heavy hook that hung suspended above the shaft. Even when trying to throw some light on the darkness below, there was nothing more to be seen than crude stonework fading into a reflecting ink-black circle. He did pick up the clear sound of water dripping or trickling down, though, as well as an indefinable stench that vaguely reminded him of dead fish. This dank hole was probably full of rats or other vermin, and even if it did contain potable water, there was no way to retrieve it without a bucket or a pail. Nevertheless, the wooden pulley mechanism above the well, the spool, the rope, and its hook had remained surprisingly intact over the years. Ludlov lifted his lantern once more, ready to turn back to Tolfmann, when he suddenly heard another sound down the well. a splash in the water. It might just have been some rocks or loose stones, but something must have caused them to move. There had to be some sort of animal down there. The fact that it was dark outside made speculating about the origin of the noise all the more chilling. Moreover, in the light of his lantern he would attract the attention of anyone or anything that might be lurking nearby. Ludlov extinguished the lantern, leaving himself in total darkness. Then, as quietly as a mouse, he slowly leaned over the edge of the well once more, peering downward. For an indefinite stretch of time, he saw only blackness and heard nothing more than the continuous trickle of the water. But then, very faintly, he picked up something else as well. It was a sort of purring, as if from a very large cat, but it sounded wet and slimy. Then, a sudden movement came from the side of the well, as if something appeared and hid again. The well was old, so there might be some damage to the stone shaft, creating a hiding place for a creature. A shiver travelled down Ludlov's spine. Remaining absolutely quiet, he kept his eyes wide open and tried his best to keep his breath slow and steady. The sound did not return, but he was sure there was something alive down there. Ludlov managed to find his way back in the pale light of the moon, which seemed a bit brighter now than the previous nights. When he returned to the remains of the house, he was relieved to find the broken door still shut as he had left it. He found Tolfmann still fast asleep. The modest fire had reached the last stages of its life. The lonesome flame still danced wearily on the largest log in the middle, but the surrounding kindling had gone out. Only a few embers still glowed among the ashes, like the red eyes of evil creatures in the night. The scent of the smoke was overwhelming, and Ludlov considered opening the door, but eventually decided to keep it shut. He felt more comfortable that way. What if the wolves returned? The smoke wasn't bad enough to smother them, and the broken window still provided some fresh air. Despite the dusky conditions, he could still recognize the most basic shapes in the room. He felt more at ease leaving the lantern extinguished and put it against the wall. Ludlov nestled himself closer to the fireplace and closed his eyes. He knew he was not allowed to fall asleep for a few more hours, but it couldn't hurt if he allowed his brain and body some rest. He tried to exist in the moment for a while, taking in the smell of burned wood, feeling the subtle warmth of the remaining fire on his face, as well as the draft surrounding him. He allowed his muscles to relax and took slow, deep breaths. He had no idea how long he'd been sitting there like that, but a sudden, alarming whiff woke him from his slumbers. The strange smell subtly intermingled with the smoke. Ludlov reassured himself that they were hiding in a ruin of what used to be a house, and despite his efforts to clear it completely, it would be unlikely for the chimney to function properly. Still, the scent he picked up reminded him of burning herbs. Too late did he notice the bluish-grey cloud of smoke that came drifting towards him from the door. Ludlov crawled up and grabbed his dagger. He tried to reach the door in order to throw it open and get out as soon as possible, but he couldn't keep himself from breathing in any longer, and he had to approach the strange smoke to get closer to the door. In a sudden panic, he gasped and breathed in more of the fumes. It stung. He lost control over his faculties, and his dagger clattered onto the ground. An unnatural, invisible weight pressed down on his chest and shoulders, and his mind felt like a raft in a storm. He tried to call out, but he was unable to make a sound. The pressure took hold of his eyelids, his nostrils, and his mouth. An unpleasant tingling sensation penetrated into his trachea and his lungs. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the silhouette of a second pouch near Tolfmann's bedroll. In a haze, he realized someone must have thrown those things through the window. Darkness closed in, and he felt like he was falling into a well, down that hole of shadows where strange and evil things lurked. Dreadful Dawn. Ludlov woke up with his sore back against the cold wall, a heavy feeling in his stomach, and a foul, acrid taste in his mouth. He crawled up on his elbows and found all his muscles burning from the unnatural position he'd maintained for goddess knew how long. He touched his throbbing head with the palm of his hand and discovered it was bleeding. His lantern lay on the floor, broken shards of glass spread out on the ruined floorboards. A shaft of cool sunlight from the window landed on a mysterious pouch, the source of the smoke that had knocked him out. The foul emission itself was spent now, but it had done its work. A shiver went through his already cold body. Tolfmann! Pain shooting through his every muscle, he turned to the initiate's bedroll. It was empty. Tolfmann! Ludlov tried to call out, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again. Tolfmann! There was no reply. Biting through his discomfort, Ludlov stood up and searched the room. Tolfmann's backpack was still there, but the man himself was nowhere to be seen. He was relieved his gear had not been taken. As he took it, he even noticed his pistol was still loaded. Ludlov opened the door and looked outside. Despite the dark clouds and light rain that had formed above the ruins, the cool morning light was more blinding than he had expected or cared for. So he shielded his eyes with his hand. His head was throbbing in pain. Bereft of Knight's cloak, the ruined hamlet looked in even worse shape during the day. Relieved he was still wearing his coat and still had his gear, he went out into the drizzle. First, he looked around quietly for his companion. Then he decided to call out for him. Tolfmann! He didn't care if anyone heard him shout. He was ready for them. Tolfmann! He managed to cry out, but it was not nearly loud enough. Tolfmann! The only answer Ludlov received was his own voice, echoing back from the other side of the square. His heart raced. The cultist vermin had struck. They had been watching all this time. Perhaps they had even overheard the discussion on Tolfmann's abilities and concluded he was an asset. Performers of the arcanic art were often taken by cultists for use in all sorts of vile rituals. Ludlov was quite convinced that was exactly what had happened to his own Maria. And if not... He recalled in which condition they had found the guard called Roland, and his stomach turned. Ludlov could almost curse himself. He had only just written to Lady Hoskiv that Tolfmann was safe and sound. In a matter of a few heartbeats, the drizzle turned into a heavy shower, accompanied by a soft rumble. Tolfmann! He cried out again, as loud as his damaged vocal cords would allow. But there was no response. It was no use. The initiate had been taken, and whoever had done so had been far ahead of Ludlov. The evidence was there. The pouches were of the same sort they had found in Olva's basement in the Hungry Hound. Ludlov had to follow their trail and get his companion back. He tried to calm himself, using the meditative techniques he had learned during his training, but he couldn't do it. Panic arose, a wave of tiny stings passing all over his skin. It turned into anger, rising from deep within. Anger at himself for leaving his watch, anger at the goddess for ignoring his prayers, and ultimately, anger at his enemies. He screamed in frustration and punched his fist against the wooden door of the house behind him. Splinters stuck out of his bleeding knuckles. I'm a fool! A fool! He closed his eyes,
bowed his head, took a deep breath, and gathered his thoughts.
I'm going to find you, Tolfmann. I don't know how, but I will.
Ludlov turned back into the house, leaving the door open. Whoever took Tolfmann must have left with him while it was still dark. Still, they had left Tolfmann's damaged but still working lantern on the table, so Ludlov filled it with the remaining oil from his own broken one. He opened Tolfmann's backpack. He would take what supplies he could use and leave the rest behind. When he had stored as much as he could in his own backpack, he threw it over his shoulder and left the house. Of course, there were no tracks. They would have been very clear in the mud of this village square, but the assailants had been smart and patient enough to get rid of them. He carefully scouted the surrounding area, still aware that he might be watched by some remaining cultists. He didn't find any tracks and assumed multiple men had carried Tolfmann. But then he wondered why there were no footprints to be seen at all in the soft, moist underground. The mystery only deepened. If there had been several attackers, why hadn't they taken Ludlov as well? What drove these cultists to choose specific victims? Why Tolfmann and not him? For the moment, he could only surmise that the villainous cads had indeed been eavesdropping on their conversation and taken Tolfmann for his arcanic abilities. That young man was far more remarkable than he had guessed. As he stood there, trying to make up his mind on what to do, he heard a rustle from some nearby bushes. He turned towards the sound and drew his weapons. Then it seemed to move to the right, to disappear further on behind the chapel. For a while he just stood there, trying to ease his breathing. He failed to notice anything out of the ordinary. It had probably been little more than a fox or a rabbit. He couldn't allow himself to become paranoid. Even though the cultists had arranged a few hours of solid sleep for him, he felt as if he hadn't rested in days. The pain in his muscles was beginning to subside, but now his arm and leg muscles began to feel numb. It was as if a surgeon had operated on him during his sleep and replaced his brain with a bag of grains. Still, whatever he felt, he had to go after the initiate. But which direction to take? In that instant, however much he resisted the thought, he knew he needed the help of others. He whispered Fulcrin's name again to his magic ring.
Fulcrin.
He still had it. That was strange as well, he realized. The cultists had apparently completely ignored him, not even touching any of his possessions. Ludlov had no idea whether his winged companion could possibly have delivered the message to Lady Hoskiv in such a short time, but when Fulcrin arrived, the little tube around his neck was empty. Perhaps the falcon did have certain magical abilities, which Ludlov didn't begin to comprehend. When Ludlov had just received the ring from his friend, he had thought that it summoned a natural bird from the vicinity and bound it in an unspoken friendship to the owner of the ring. Now, however, he began to suspect that Fulcrin was the same bird that had been summoned by Queen Sintrasha herself many ages ago. Well, if he had indeed already delivered the note in Seven Peaks, Ludlov hoped he had behaved like a perfectly normal falcon. He took out his writing material and held up a piece of vellum against the same door he had smashed with his fist earlier. Fulcrin was seated on Ludlov's shoulder, watching with great interest, as if he could read the note his master was writing.
Tolfmann has been taken. I need help. Ludlov.
Ludlov had no time to explain too much. Hastily, he entrusted the note to the little tube around Fulcrin's neck and sent the falcon off to Hübschdorf. He watched the bird fly off to the southeast and decided to head in more or less the same direction. He would head back to the tree with the white ribbon, where all the trouble had started. His gut told him the enemy wasn't too far from that place. The discomfort of the fume's effect began to wear off, and he found himself fueled by a renewed energy to find his friend. After a while, he came upon the tree where they had fended off the wolves. The corpses were still there, untouched. During the chase, they had seemed so diabolical to Ludlov. Now they simply looked like dead animals. They even had a peaceful quality to them. There was no trace left of the rabid aggression they had displayed. He began to suspect that the evil magic users of the cult had somehow steered the creature's behavior. He knew there were forms of psychomancy that could do that. Perhaps Weiss's confrontation with the normally docile armored maceling had been another example of that. He was certain that the cultists were active nearby. Hastily, he took out his rations and ate as little as possible, even as he continued his trek through the wildwood, back to the white-ribboned tree. Salt and smoke. Afternoon had passed and dusk was setting in. The clouds had parted and the rain had ended for now, but Ludlov was soaked to the bone. Worse than that, he felt like he had been walking in circles all day. There was no trace of Tolfmann, nor any familiarity to the woodland landscape. He became more and more convinced that spells were being used to cloud his judgment. Whoever had taken Tolfmann probably wanted to wear Ludlov out and eventually capture him as well, once they had reduced him to the state of a weakened animal. In his heart, Ludlov felt he was failing in his duty, and with that conviction, a seed of doubt was planted concerning the mission itself. There was a very real chance that he would have to return to Seven Peaks without any of his witch hunter brethren. The thought was unbearable, but if he couldn't retrieve any of his friends, the only option left would be to die here, alone in the woods, or perhaps in the clutches of the foul enemies who had brought all this ruin upon him. Ludlov stumbled and fell to the ground. He stifled a curse and berated himself for his carelessness, but he was mostly irrationally angry at those roots sticking out everywhere. A second glance revealed that it wasn't a root that had tripped him up, though. It was white. A broken bone, partly buried under the earth. He had to be close to the cultist's lair. He was certain of it. An uneasy feeling gnawed at him, telling him that there was no return. Once the enemy found him, he would be in their clutches. Still, he had to go on, for his brothers, and so he did, all by himself. He was in the thicket once more, surrounded by tall oaks and ash trees, their wet leaves glowing gold and copper in the setting sun under a purple sky. The beauty of Ludlov's surroundings was lost on him, though. He was exhausted and afraid, and furious with himself for feeling such weak emotions. Usually, the witch hunter was most comfortable when he was on his own. Here, solitude made him uneasy. As he made his way through the forest, he reminded himself that he was never truly alone. Assuming Fulcrin must have carried his message to Hübschdorf by now, he prayed his note had fallen into the right hands. He brought his ring to his mouth and whispered the bird's name. Less than a mile further on, a familiar cry came from between the high branches of the trees ahead. Ludlov smiled, for the first time since he had lost Tolfmann, as he saw his avian companion arrive. The falcon swooped down and gracefully landed on the witch hunter's outstretched forearm. Upon investigating the bird, it was clear that Fulcrin didn't carry any message, but since the note was gone, Ludlov assumed the people of Hübschdorf had received it. Just being around Fulcrin made him feel more at ease, even though the falcon could do little to guide him at this time. Nevertheless, having him close by made the rest of the trek more bearable. When he noticed the leaves turning to a duller shade of brown and the surrounding trees becoming gnarlier and more twisted,
Ludlov felt a sense of recognition. He was close to the tree with the white ribbon. At last. His hopes were confirmed when he was greeted by the foul stench of death once more. He would never grow used to that smell. There it was, ahead of him, still as a corpse hanging from a gibbet, the white ribbon. Whoever ruled behind the barrier had not touched it. He would finally be able to complete his Amantha scouting, and perhaps find the lair of the cultists. Still, if these villains had followed Tolfmann and himself so closely, it seemed unlikely they hadn't noticed the mark. This led Ludlov to conclude that whoever was out here actually wanted him to return. A sudden chill breeze arose, causing the ribbon to flutter. The unexpected gust of wind ruffled Ludlov's hair underneath his hat and gave him goosebumps. As the sound of rustling leaves faded again, an unnatural silence fell, as if someone unseen had tamed the wind through sheer force of will. Not a leaf or a branch stirred, and it seemed as if all the animals in the woods were frozen in place for a moment, listening attentively, just as Ludlov was. Until the cry of a crow made his heart skip a beat. For a second, he thought it was Mistress Weiss's bird, but it flew further east and ignored Ludlov. As he was about to start his second Amantha leaf, a memory returned to his mind. The last time he had been here, he had seen a shimmer, and had been wondering why that had struck him as something strangely familiar. Had it been something Anna had mentioned? Then he remembered. Her son, Florian, was the one who had described something similar. The shimmer had revealed to the boy that he had been looking at a disguise, a deception. The same might be true here. Perhaps the cult had covered up their whereabouts with illusion magic, and they were actually much closer than Ludlov had imagined. He had learned a fair bit about such spells in his witch hunter training, but his teachers had emphasized that as a subset of psychomancy, illusion spells were among the most complicated forms of magic, except for flesh magic, perhaps. Ludlov was certain there was a lot more to the topic, but it was hard to learn anything about it since the Order kept executing every magic user they caught without interrogating them. How were they supposed to gain any more insight that way? There was one thing he had learned about illusion magic that had always stuck with him. He had memorized it in the form of a rhyme, as he often did.
Illusion complicates a case, but it always leaves a trace.
As he peered between the trees ahead, he realized just how true that was. Whatever magical cover the cult had set up to keep intruders away, it had left a trace that was now gone. In the space where he had noticed the shimmer before, he could now see deeper into the woods, between the thick patch of trees in the distance. He was sure he hadn't seen those particular trees before and decided to head in that direction. As soon as he stepped towards the unfamiliar trees, it seemed like the air became much colder, and the dying light softened and dulled. The ground beneath Ludlov's boots was soft and black, but every footprint he made vanished, as if the soil filled itself up again after his passing. There was undoubtedly magic involved. Ludlov realized that whoever had enchanted this place did not only want him to find them, but also wanted no one else to follow his tracks. Still, something pressed him to move on. Was it curiosity, courage, or rather desperation? It didn't matter, he concluded. He had no other choice but to continue. Ahead, he saw a huge, jagged rock formation. It was practically a small mountain peak towering above the tree line, covered by dead ivy still clinging to its surface like cobwebs in some forgotten attic. It would have been impossible to miss without the involvement of strong magic. As he approached, he saw that there were parasite plants
which he didn't recognize, hanging from the outcroppings like the long, tangled hair of witches looking down from above. Around those plants he noticed silver moonflowers, a plant that flourished wherever black magic was used. Throughout his career, the witch hunter had recognized many an evil there by its presence. The growth almost concealed a gaping black cave entrance. If Ludlov hadn't been looking for an entrance, he certainly would have missed it. It was an oval ingress, the size of a modest doorway. The black mouth seemed to be staring at him, holding its breath and revealing only a fraction of its gaping maw. He had found the lair of the cultists. They were no longer hiding. Now, they were expecting him. Without thinking, he took off his backpack and rummaged inside until he found his smoke orb. He only had one, but his instincts told him it was a good time to consider its use. Ludlov stuffed it in the side pocket of his leather coat next to the box of Sancta Adalia. He also started to light the damaged lantern, hoping its light would last long enough inside that dark cave. He took the time to make a torch out of a strong branch and some cloth, as a backup in case his lantern should fail him. He tucked the torch under his belt, took a deep breath, and began to approach the cave entrance, drawing his blade ever so slowly as he went. He took sluggish steps, as careful and as quiet as he could manage. Every tread felt like an act of reckless bravery. The foul stench of rotting meat rose up in the air, and Fulcrin was growing uneasy, ruffling his wings. There was a sudden movement behind Ludlov's shoulder that did not originate from his animal companion. He turned, slowly and gingerly, carefully scanning the area. Then he saw it. About 10 paces to his left, there was a face between the trees. He had almost missed it, since it was so still, and it was devoid of any natural skin color. The thing was grayish pale, with wounds that seemed to have been inflicted years ago but never healed. Its dull gray hair looked like dead weeds sticking out of its scalp. Its eyes were closed, and its nose was nothing more than a set of parallel triangular holes from which something indefinable oozed. Most disturbing of all, however, was the mouth, which was wide agape at a strange angle, as if the creature's jawbone had broken, a purple tongue hanging out of it like a dead worm. Something moved within its mouth, but Ludlov had no idea what it was. Ludlov was reminded of an encounter with undead creatures on the remote island of Garadoso. Those had merely been corpses animated by ancient and forgotten magic, and he'd been fighting alongside friends then. He now faced much more perilous opponents, animated by a magical agent still alive and nearby. And this time, Ludlov was on his own. The remnant stumbled slowly towards him. There were likely more. At least Ludlov knew he had arrived at the right place. He also knew he would have to make some snap decisions. The remnant was eerily still, but that didn't mean it hadn't seen him. It could simply be waiting for him to make a move. These undead were strange. They didn't think, and their behavior could be wildly erratic.
"You're my only link to the people of Hübschdorf, Fulcrin,"
Ludlov whispered to the falcon on his shoulder.
"Keep out of trouble. Leave this place. Find safety."
Fulcrin blinked and seemed unwilling to leave.
"Go, friend,"
Ludlov repeated, more sternly. Then the bird hopped off his master's shoulder, spread his wings, and began climbing up into the sky. Fulcrin was gone. The undead face was still there, unmoving. Ludlov had to be quick. He dug up the small vial of blessed salt from the hip pocket of his jerkin. He had to be frugal, but it was better than nothing.
He knelt down and set the lantern on the ground beside him. Then he took out the vial and opened it, sprinkling it in a circle around him. It was not a perfect circle, and given the time to do it properly, he would have done a better job, but it would have to do for now. Slowly, he drew his pistol and rose to his feet, leaving the lantern on the ground. The face between the trees to the east opened its eyes. They were entirely white, without any intended expression, but Ludlov felt as if they were calling out to him in deep and everlasting despair. Then, other bodies appeared from every direction. There were 6 of them. 3 were clearly rotting and dressed in little more than tattered rags, but the others seemed almost like living people, were it not for their pallid complexions and cold, staring eyes. The rotting ones were clearly remnants. The others were more likely either waning or deprived. Ludlov counted 4 men and 2 women among them, all clothed like ordinary villagers. The undead approached slowly and patiently, as if they were utterly convinced their prey could not possibly escape. They all walked in the same direction, clearly steered by a single mind. Destroying them was out of the question. It was impossible to kill the remnants without killing the necromancer controlling them, who was nowhere to be seen. And it struck Ludlov that this person had exceptional control over these remnants, which he read was the hardest part of necromancy, after successfully performing the undead ritual. Some of the undead had already reached the circle of salt. They held still there, looking up and down at him with large eyes, but they were unable to pass. The salt seemed to work, but Ludlov couldn't possibly keep standing here indefinitely. He was trapped. A woman in a dirty red dress stood right in front of him. Her waxy skin had the color of snow in the moonlight. A noose was tied around her neck, leaving black and purple bruises on her throat. 2 men flanked him. They might have been ordinary farmers by the looks of them, but they spread a strange smell. It wasn't rotten or putrid at all. The scent might even be described as pleasant, but somehow it reminded Ludlov of death nonetheless. They looked innocent and bewildered, like lost children. Ludlov knew better, though. These creatures were waning, and if the necromancer who commanded them willed it, they would claw his very eyes out in an instant. Safe for the moment, Ludlov lit his torch, knowing that fire would keep all types of undead at bay. If he had been properly prepared for a battle against the undead, Ludlov would have dipped his rapier in holy water and sprinkled it with salt as well. Now, all he could do was spit on the blade and sprinkle his last remaining salt onto it. The creatures clawed at him, unaware of the protective circle around their target. Ludlov knew he couldn't stay here forever. He took a deep breath and uttered a quick prayer to Sancta Gwendala. Then he kicked the hanged woman in the stomach, causing her to fall down. Immediately, he dashed out of the circle of salt and smashed the burning torch into her downed face. She made a hellish sound, which Ludlov ignored. He dashed ahead, but stiff, cold hands were already tugging at his leather coat and reaching for his arms and legs. He turned around, waved his rapier and slashed 2 of the male undead through the chest. They looked surprised and puzzled, as if they couldn't understand what was happening. Thick, dark red, almost black blood trickled slowly out of their wounds. These were waning, and he could theoretically destroy them, but there were at least 2 more remnants closing in, which were impossible to defeat. The best he could hope for was an escape. He slowly backed down, inching closer to the mouth of the cave with every step. The female remnant stood up, her face black and grey, her hair still on fire. Wide, pale eyes glared at him accusingly. "Back!" Ludlov shouted, still waving his torch. The other 2 remnants were spreading out, attempting to flank him. A third waning appeared from a little further on. A short, bald man with a friendly smile on his face, even as he raised a pair of curved daggers with jagged blades in each hand. Ludlov knew he had run out of time. He had one last option at hand. He quickly slid his rapier underneath his weapons belt and furiously traced an arc of fire with his torch. While the flurrying motion and bright light distracted the monsters, he tried quickly to dig up the small glass orb from the side pocket of his coat with his freed hand. He would only have one shot at this. But before he could aim, a ravenous remnant bumped into him, making him lose his balance and tumble onto the ground. The box of Sancta Adalia fell out of his pocket, causing a remnant close by to step aside to avoid it, approaching Ludlov at the same time. He was unable to retrieve it without getting closer to the undead. With a clumsy stretch of his hand, he did manage to catch the small smoke orb, saving it from getting smashed on one of the rocks on the ground. Since he only had one of these orbs, he would have to throw it strategically. He quickly got up and moved away from the approaching undead, then swiftly aimed the globe at the cave wall. He prepared for a hard throw that would break the globe despite the plants on the rocks. With a sigh, he smashed the glass orb on the wall just right of the entrance, while the two remnants to his left and right were breaking into a run towards him. He squeezed his eyes shut and held his breath as a massive black cloud erupted, creating a curtain of smoke. He turned and dashed into the cave, turned again and threw his burning torch into the black cloud. With a terrifying roar, a wall of flames rose up. Hoarse screaming resounded on the other side of it, reverberating into the cave. If the villagers of Hübschdorf had witnessed that little display, they might come to think witch hunters had supernatural abilities of their own. Alas, Ludlov realized, there would be no repeat of his spectacular escape. He was down to pure brute force. On top of that, he had lost Tolfmann's relic. Not only would the initiate never forgive him for losing his precious box, but a sacred item now lay discarded in the woods. Ludlov could kick himself, but spared his energy. He had no other choice but to move forward, deeper into the cave. Trembling, he drew his rapier again and saw the hellish light of the fire reflected in its polished steel. Then he began to make his way into the dark tunnel, with no more light to guide him. The rocky walls surrounding him were cold and moist. Ludlov had to feel his way ahead, as it sloped gently downward. The light of the fire disappeared behind him, and he heard no more undead approaching. If he didn't know any better, he could curse himself in this moment. His tactics had been rash and ill-advised. He should have been dead. His impulsiveness was one of the character traits that Maria had never been fond of, he knew. It had often gotten him into dangerous situations. Then again, reacting to situations such as these was like flipping a coin. If he hadn't done anything, he would have surely died. He had lost his lantern, his torch, his blessed salt, his smoke orb, and the relic of Sancta Adalia. But at least, he was alive for now, and he was inside the enemy's lair. He was close now, so close. His trembling body told him there was no question about it. He had entered the realm of the evildoers. In the outskirts of Seven Peaks, he would have sent a troop of his witch hunter brethren in, and that would have been that. Now, he had to admit he relished the opportunity to finish this himself. Still, he knew he was up against a superior force. He decided on a careful, stealthy approach. With only his rapier, pistol, and dagger at hand, it almost felt like he had entered the den naked. After all, he could only wield two weapons at once, since unlike the Dugarim, he only had two arms. He hoped he'd be able to spy on the cult, perhaps find out where Tolfmann was being held, and then return with reinforcements. His heart raced as he perceived several thin vertical lines of reddish light ahead. As he approached, he could tell the tunnel ended at a simple door, constructed out of wooden boards. He noticed he was grinding his teeth, an unfortunate habit he had picked up some time ago. Like so many times before in his career, he had no idea what to expect next. He would never grow used to that sensation. He was beginning to doubt if this was indeed the cult's hideout, since it seemed so abandoned. Maybe they had seen him coming and left hours ago. Maybe they had set a trap for him, or maybe they had moved their captives to some other location. Still, this had to be a place of some importance. and he was bound to at least find some clues. Ludlov listened at the door for a while, but there was no sound except for a crackling fire. He couldn't find a doorknob or a handle, but when he put his palm to the door, it instantly gave way, opening slowly with a long, high, keening sound. The fear that had taken hold of him was immediately replaced by a gulf of relief. In the warm light of several torches mounted on the walls and a charming campfire, he saw a rather small room with uneven, rocky walls and a modest cupola in the ceiling. There was a table in the center, consisting of a heavy stone tablet fixed on top of a wide tree stump. Around the table stood 4 simple, hand-crafted wooden chairs, 2 of which were occupied. The man on the right didn't move. His head rested in his hands. The terrified eyes of the man on the left peered at Ludlov from above a tight gag. Even without the witch hunter hat shading them, Ludlov immediately recognized those piercing blue eyes, and his heart skipped a beat. The impossible had happened. He had found Brynjar and Svensson, alive.
Thank you for listening to the 6th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf, a witch hunter tale. We hope we're slowly activating your goosebump mechanism, so you'll be able to get full-blown chills throughout the second part of this epic fantasy audiobook. What gives me chills is knowing that we get the financial support of mostly complete strangers who believe in us like a sibling. It really warms our hearts. Thank you, Amy and Dallas Austin, Antonio Padula, Peter Strandkrone, Cody H, Jogoth Ur, Matt Petain, Cameron Brantley, Tony Ranico, Liam Gabriel, Mix and Match, Caitlin Bourgeois, Kadir Hussein, Yizi Dusht, Gander, Osarion, Alu, Arno Teva, Ryan Stock, Jay, Rob Skinner, Tim the Gothic Horror Guy, Johnny White, Sue Morgan, Joey Dell. He's new on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, Joey. And Dustin Garner. Yes, he is the guy whose name inspired a very important character in the story, and some of you have commented or emailed us that he's one of your favorite characters. So if you want to find out how that works, check out our tiers on Patreon. We currently have 27 patrons, and we're really grateful for their support. They help us to stay motivated and to pay for expensive software licenses, the music of our 3 very talented and human composers, ditto cover artists, so our work can't be mistaken for AI-generated. If you enjoyed this episode and you're on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll know when a new video appears. We also love all your comments. When we see them, we respond to them or give them a heart. We hope you'll be here next Friday during our premiere of the 7th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. If you're on Podbean, please share the link and don't miss out on episode 7. The next chapter is called Den of Evil, so now you're sure we really mean business. We'll be live in the chat during the premiere. If you can't wait till Friday, you can purchase the story on Bandcamp or join us on Patreon in the Master Witch Hunter tier or higher to get hold of the extended edition. Or you can support us in other tiers from as little as $1 a month. That would be a mere $12 a year that could buy us a nice paperback from an inspiring indie fantasy author, or at least a couple of ebooks. The Dutch or Flemish word for autumn or fall is herfst, which is notorious amongst linguists because supposedly it's impossible to find anything that rhymes with it. But for you diehards still out there, write us in the comments a word that rhymes with fall. I bet you can do that. After that, we bid everyone near our time zone a very fun good night, and those on the other side of the ocean a pleasant afternoon or evening. and we hope to see you again next week for episode 7. Bye!